Saquon Barkley is having one of the best, if not the best years for a running back in NFL history. Now, of course, that statement is subjective. I even have on my New York Giants hat. I'm not a Sour Graves fan. I'm happy for the guy. He's killing it. But based on what Barkley has achieved in one season as an Eagle, is he having the best season ever for a running back? And again, it's all subjective. There's so many different things and variables you have to weigh in, such as the amount of games a running back played, the decade or era they played in. There's a lot of factors. We'll break down the numbers. All right, let's dive in. Okay, so I prepared a few prompts to use with ChatGPT to help us with our research. It'll make things a little bit easier. But let's just recap. Saquon Barkley, one season with the Eagles. He played in 16 games. He didn't play the 17th. He had 2,005 rushing yards and 345 carries, nearly 6 yards a carry, 13 rushing touchdowns, and also another 278 and two more touchdowns receiving. Also, in the postseason, Barkley has dominated, picking up 442 rushing yards, five more touchdowns, and averaging a whopping 7 yards per carry. And I personally think he should be the MVP for the year. So let's also pull up some other records that Barkley has broken this year. So he set the Eagles' single season rushing record with the 2,005 yards, surpassing Shady McCoy by a lot. He set the record for most 60-plus yard touchdown runs. He is a home run hitter. If you've been watching him this year, he can break it for a monster play at any time. And he's done it the most out of anyone ever, and including the postseason where he has racked up the most postseason 60-plus yard runs with three of them, and he's done it in a single postseason. But let's also just take into consideration that he probably would have had more touchdowns if it wasn't for the Eagles and their tush push, and he's now put up a total of 2,447 yards, which is only 30 yards less than Terrell Davis, who previously set the record with 2,476 during the Broncos' 98 Super Bowl winning season. So Barkley should certainly surpass that. And after the Super Bowl, win or lose, he should be the new all-time rushing yards holder for a full season, regular season and postseason. Okay, so let's go ahead and pull up the top 10 NFL running back seasons of all time, including Saquon's this year. Naturally, we can start off with Eric Dickerson, who had 2,105 on the year, which is still the record. Saquon might have broken it. And I think that's important to know, too, because he didn't play a 17th game. And even if it is an extra game more than Dickerson, you have to remember OJ set the 2,000-yard record in just 14 games. And we still consider Eric Dickerson, I think, as the record holder. So regardless of the amount of games, while it's important to know, and you put an asterisk on it, whatever you want. Look, that's why I say errors are different. It just depends. But if Barkley played that last game against the Giants, and you have to remember also earlier in the season, Barkley sat out when he was going to have a career day against the Giants, and it was a blowout, and he just sat out the rest of the game. So I think it's also safe to assume he probably would have had the regular season and the all-time regular season and postseason rushing yard record had he played every game. And I mean, that's just absurd. Also, Adrian Peterson in 2012 had 2,097 yards and nearly set the rushing record himself, earning the MVP. Jamal Lewis had an amazing year, if you remember, back in 2003. Barry Sanders, I mean, we can't forget. I think by and far he might be considered the GOAT by a lot. Just a ridiculous season in 97 with 14 consecutive 100-yard games and 2,053 rushing yards. Then, of course, we have Terrell Davis's 98 season, which we just discussed. He also had 21 touchdowns. CJ2K in his 2,000-yard season, he also had the extra 500 yards from scrimmage. Of course, we have Saquon here. OJ, a lot of people might just defer to him as the rushing record holder just because he did it in only 14 games. And, if you're going to look at him as the record holder because he did it in the least amount of games, then the next, I guess, running back after that would have to do it in 14 games. But again, it's subjective due to the error and just the way things are. Like, it's not the player's fault that things change. But again, I understand if you want to look at the 14 games and say, hey, That's the rushing record because he's the only one to do it in 14 games. Also, LT and his 28 rushing touchdowns, and also that year he had a few more receiving touchdowns, and he has the most touchdowns for a running back in a season ever, and he won the MVP that year. And of course, Derrick Henry, King Henry, with his amazing year. Just to pull up LT's numbers, it was 31 touchdowns, which is the record for a non QB for most touchdowns in a season. And also, just to pull up Marshall Faulk's numbers, he had a remarkable season, amassing 1,000 yards both rushing and receiving in 1999. And that was also the year they won a Super Bowl. The Rams were known as the greatest show on turf. Kurt Warner, Torrey Holt, if you remember that team. And also, Marshall Faulk won the MVP the following year, as Kurt Warner won the MVP in 1999. And certainly, honorable mentions need to go out to Roger Craig, who became the first player in NFL history to count for 1,000 yards receiving and rushing, and McCaffrey did so as well in 2019. And so I think you could probably pick and choose which McCaffrey you want to include as his best season. But I think there are 1 or 2 years where you could put him in the category of having one of the best seasons ever for a running back. Obviously, he was injured this past year, but in 2023, he had 2,000 yards from scrimmage and 21 touchdowns. And also, let's take a look at just total combined yards, as that's an important stat. So if we pull that up, Chris Johnson, his amazing year with 2,509, phenomenal. Marshall Faulk, like we just talked about, McCaffrey, like we just mentioned, Tiki Barber, you can put his season up there, and obviously Saquon this year. And also, let's just pull up the top 10 most combined yards for rushing and receiving, including the regular season and postseason. So Terrell Davis is at the top of the list with 27.62, and Barkley is 2 yards behind him. So not only will Barkley probably surpass him in terms of rushing yards, he will surpass Terrell Davis in terms of combined yards. Marshall Faulk is in there, number 3, McCaffrey again, and then it's pretty similar as above. And just to top it off, I think we can also look at rushing yards just for the postseason. If you want to just look at both things separately, let's go ahead. John Riggins amassed 610 yards in 1982. And Barkley, in theory, could potentially surpass and break that record as well. I mean, he would have to put on quite a performance to do so, but it is in the realm of possibility. So let's just recap quickly everything Barkley has done in this one of, if not the best running back seasons ever. He has almost broken the single season rushing record. He will probably break the combined regular season postseason rushing record. He will probably break the combined postseason regular season all combined yards from scrimmage record. He has the most 60-plus yard touchdowns in a regular season, the most 60-plus yard touchdowns in a postseason, the most 60-plus yards touchdown in one season combined ever. He's done that in 1 year. He's going to the Super Bowl. He should get MVP, in my opinion. And also you throw in the 15 touchdowns as well during the regular season. Plus you can throw in his 5 touchdowns from the postseason. So in total, he has 20 touchdowns on the year and will possibly have more in the Super Bowl. So is Saquon Barkley having the best season for a running back ever? It can be argued as such. At the end of the day, he could wind up with the most yards from scrimmage for a running back ever. And to me, I mean, I love Saquon. I will say, as a Giants fan and watching Saquon for a number of years, I'm going to say yes. This is the best season I've ever seen from a running back ever. And he's just so dominant. The backwards leap, he's just so hard to tackle, and he can do it all. Again, your opinion can be different, and it should be different. It's your opinion. But obviously, there are a number of contenders there, so I wouldn't debate you too much on that. But for me, the answer is Saquon Barkley. The best running back season we've ever seen. He deserves it.